Yep.
All right, so I'm going to call the Capital Planning Committee to order from Monday, September 13th, 2021. It is currently 7:32 p.m. I'm very thankful to not have to read this preamble anymore, and we will get right into our business. I do not expect Ms. Braccio tonight, so it'll just be the 5 voting members that you see present, plus obviously Mark and Brian are here as our ex officio members. So the first action item is approval of meeting minutes from August 9th, 2021. Joe circulated these some time ago for consideration. Did anyone have any comments?
I did a list of edits for Jeff. So, but if anybody else, if Jeff has more, great. Otherwise, I did all of yours, Jeff. So it should be
Okay.
I had a few, and I apologize for not sending these in advance, Joe.
no problem.
Under the guest RFQ interview panelists at the top, I didn't think that those were necessary, given you already list them below, and it implies that no one else was in the meeting room, which I believe there were town residents, which I don't remember who it was. So I would just suggest striking that, because I think you do a great job of covering it down below under the interviews.
Get rid of the guest RFQ interview panelists at the top.
That would be my suggestion,
Okay.
unless anyone thinks differently.
Done.
The other part was under item 4. The
Okay.
committee was made aware by the chair that the meeting would not be broadcast live. I would just clarify via YouTube.
That's been changed to not be it would not be broadcast on YouTube.
Perfect. I agree.
Okay. All right, that's Jeff sent.
All right. And then the only thing I was just questioning, and this is a question more for the broader committee, was whether we just needed to expand a little bit on the discussion. You know, Joe, you wrote, discussion yielded that all members generally felt the candidates were competent, but favored Central Mass projects in the Vertex companies overall. And then it said Central Mass projects was favored slightly by a majority of the members in consideration of the 2 preferred candidates. I thought it was pretty unanimous that everyone was behind Central Mass. I don't think anyone was saying Vertex ahead. I think we did a lot of compare and contrast, some of us. That's what I had for that. So I just didn't know if anyone thought we needed to beef that up just a little bit of, I mean, we did select someone, they were awarded a public contract, why we selected Central Mass, and to have it reflect that it was unanimous, not a majority. Welcome thoughts from others.
I think that makes sense. I would agree with you on that there seemed to be a consensus on that.
Yeah, I think there seemed to be a consensus, although we didn't vote, so I don't know that we know definitively.
Well, we ended up, there's a motion in the second paragraph. We did vote. I went back, we went around and everyone kind of said Central Mass. I definitely added a perspective probably on Vertex that others didn't maybe have based on my past experience with them and looking into RFQ, but still had said Central Mass. So I would just suggest we add something along the lines of Central Mass was, you know, the top choice of the committee due to the project team that was presented, coupled with their past work experience at the Southborough Library and the comparable scope. That's what I thought were the deciding factors that everyone seemed to latch onto. I don't think we need to go down to each individual, you know, other items we mentioned, but that was, I thought, where we were kind of all in alignment. Does anyone disagree with that?
Okay. What I just wrote for you was Central Mass Projects was favored by all candidates due to the project team and their work on the library project with similar scope. Does that pretty much sum up what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Done.
Okay. And then there's some typos, but I feel like if just a spell check, or Jeff maybe got those already, like queried and some other items. That I was good.
You got,
Does it make sense for me to cover for the benefit of the committee just what I had since I?
If they were content related, yes.
Okay. The first thing I had was I think that the preamble that was the old one. There was a new one that was in place subsequent, which I sent to Joe. So it was a, I believe.
I actually took out the entire preamble because we got that email that said we no longer had to put a preamble in. So when I got your email, I just took it out.
Okay, that's fine. In the interview section, this was more kind of, I don't know, just format, but for the other interviews we had, we just listed out the questions in that section. So that was my comment there, to just include the questions that we asked in that section of each of the companies we interviewed. And then for the documents referenced, I said to list out the RFQ submitted by the names of the company. And then the other two things, I had the townhouse OPM RFQ evaluation results and the questions provided to the committee. That's what I have for the three.
And I don't think you need, if you're going to add the questions up above, you don't need the questions down below.
Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely right.
So we do definitely need them somewhere. I'm candidly indifferent on where they appear. I agree last time we had them in the body of the minutes.
I just deleted the reference. We'll go with them up above because they were in the prior minutes, just as Jeff said.
Okay.
So,
okay.
That made sense. And there were a couple of typos that he submitted. So,
okay.
Including queried.
Okay. Karen, Andrew, anything additional?
No.
All right, then I will move that we accept the minutes with the edits discussed in this meeting. Is there a second?
Second. Oh, Jeff.
Seconded by Jeff. Roll call vote. Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye. So 5-0 on that. I do see Ken and Courtney are here. I'm going to ask them to bear with me for hopefully 3 minutes because I think it is really important to jump to item 4, as it may impact some of the questions that we have for them based on anything they're going to present to us tonight, which is chair and members update. So I'll give a school research subcommittee update first. The committee met for the first time in a while, late last week. The superintendent in the next week or two plans to make a presentation of work done by his administration on what potential space configurations are plausible based on work that he did with his administration, namely the principals of each of the Southborough Public Schools and their teams, and also received the result of a second demographic survey given the number of questions and lack of confidence in the initial NESDEC study that was performed. So that is coming very quickly, after which those results are heard. There'll likely be some analysis and steps undertaken to make a recommendation, and then it'll be ultimately up to the school committee at that point of what they want to do with it. Simultaneous with that, we should understand whether the Neary School was accepted into the MSBA Statement of Interest eligibility period for this year. They're expecting end of October or into November. They have not heard anything from MSBA yet, was what Greg reported to the subcommittee during that meeting. I think that's relevant because we're going to hear a lot from Ken and Courtney, I presume, on the school administration space that exists in Neary in terms of current and future space needs. So just wanted to raise that topic if that's where that's at, but more the timeline is about as compact as we've seen it in a long time. So happy to report on that. Any questions on that? Andrew, Joe, is there anything relevant related to the Shopsy South Union subcommittee?
I would say, we're just continuing to make progress. I mean, we had a meeting the other day. We talked through our next steps, going slowly, but they've had favorable conversations with the housing authority. We did talk about kind of looking like a space study for South Union to see what would it look like from a residential building. What could you put in there? How many units would it look like? Sort of thing. But that's a little preliminary at this time. So Joe and any more thoughts, man.
Anyone having a tough time with Andrew's audio? Or it's his microphone or audio. So Andrew, I think we got it, but just FYI in case.
Is this better?
Much better.
Okay.
Joe, anything to add on that?
The only thing I might add is that we've all had assigned tasks to accomplish for the next meeting. So
Okay.
we expect to have I think I'll have a little more content, like firm content, materialistic, factual.
And how frequently are you meeting?
We're meeting next week. So I think
Okay.
the idea, Andrew, I believe the idea was to meet every 3 weeks or so to try and accelerate the schedule, knowing that there are projects coming up and on the building that would need to be done at some point in the near future if, we didn't determine what we're going to do.
Yep.
All right.
Which was
Any
Andrew's meeting.
Any questions for Andrew or Joe while I bring Ken and Courtney in? Okay. Hi, Ken and Courtney, you're now in. Still muted. There's Courtney.
All right. We're still waiting on Ken? There
There he is.
Hi.
Hey, Ken. Hey, Courtney. So I'm going to turn who is going to be presenting tonight on who needs screen share privileges? Courtney.
That would be me.
All right. Okay. Before I turn the floor over to Ken and Courtney, I'm probably going to emphasize this 1, 2, or 3 times this evening. Obviously, I don't know where our conversation will lead, but for anyone that's watching this meeting live or after the fact, this is the first time the committee is hearing anything that Ken and Courtney are going to tell us. And there may be ideas that are hypothesized on through any sort of conversation. I would say this is a first step in what will be a long process for the town, and just would remind anyone to not grasp onto any straw that may be presented at any point during this meeting, and that we have a big puzzle to put together, I think, for the benefit of the town, and that's always been our objective. So I know there may be discussion of certain departments and what they've learned about certain departments and other boards and committees that either oversee or work collaboratively with those departments. It is my intention that after we hear where we're at tonight, that the committee have a discussion either with Ken and Courtney or after they leave us of, which other committees we want to come to future meetings so that we can publicly vet this process. So I just hope that's very clear to everyone that this is the first step, albeit a very major step in what is hopefully going to be a process that yields results for many different interests in the town. All right. With that, Ken and Courtney, I will kind of turn it over to you and see where you wanted to go with any sort of introductory remarks. The committee has the materials that were circulated to me late on Friday at their disposal, and we'll let you speak and then maybe come back with some questions and discuss next steps at the end.
Sounds good. Can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for letting us come tonight. We'll let Ken kick it off. You've met us previously. Ken, you want to step up?
Yeah. It's good to be here. And Courtney and I are here because basically we've been doing all the interviews for the various departments and starting to pull together numbers and information. And what we propose to do tonight is give you a sort of a big picture overview of how we've approached the project, then provide you with some of the results, the information that we've gathered. Courtney, next one.
Hold on one second. It's not advancing. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So just looking at the area of the town and the location of the buildings, it's sort of interesting how when you look at the geographical center of town, there's a cluster of buildings there, but then you've got buildings like South Union way down in the southern end. And one of the things that we're considering as we get to the point of developing ideas is where in the town should various departments be relative to the kinds of tasks that they're doing. So we just have this map in here to say that that's one of the things that we'll be looking at.
So where we are in the process is we've done a lot of collecting to date, and we've started our assessing through our study. We've taken existing plans, we've looked and assessed areas of those plans. We've gone in every single building and looked through all the spaces. Ken's been in the basement of townhouse, I think twice now, assessing space down there, and interviewed various department staff and directors, and it's actually been a very informational process. Like it was really fun going through all the buildings and seeing the different ways that things were utilized. And then the next steps are we're going to start looking at our options and assessing what all this information means. We've collected square footages in net form, and we're going to start looking at it in proposed form in terms of net square footage as well. So this is just an example of one of the buildings that we went through. And I know that you just mentioned the South Union building, and there's a lot of options of what could be done there, but this is an example of our assessing and collecting of existing desks, spaces, how many people are in each space, how the storage is utilized. Is it well utilized? Is it 50% full? How do you use your gym, or active space? Is it, is it enough space? How is it accessed? All of these things kind of factor into how we're going to look into our options. So the chart on the left is just a simple form that we distributed to everyone just to kind of help us document how much storage is needed, which is always a tricky situation because now we're moving towards the cloud and people are starting to think, do I really need all of this physical stuff? So we keep kind of, because this is supposed to be a 15-year study, we have to kind of think a little bit ahead. Are we really going to need all these file cabinets that we have, in various places right now? So moving forward and taking next steps, these are just plans of the South Union building. We target different departments, who's taking up which space, what's the current square footage, and then we start looking at proposed subtotals as well. This is kind of an example of diagrams that we use to assess what could be a proposed space. So sometimes we have various departments in a space that is clearly too big for them. They're kind of filling it up because it's a certain shape and that's where they were put. But it's not necessarily the same amount of square footage they actually need, to be successful in what they're doing. So we have these various, square footages and diagrams that kind of help guide us in that process of assessing what is actually needed. And then, just as a, quick snapshot, we did look into square footages, net square footage versus gross, because that's kind of a fixed point. It's going to be net, whether for current and proposed. We can't use the gross square footage for these buildings because the buildings were all built at different times. So we're not looking at corridors and bathrooms. We're looking at the actual program space, and corridors and bathrooms are different in every single building, as well as, just wall thicknesses too. So that factors in to why we don't use the gross square footage for this kind of study.
And then as we went through the gathering all the information, we then went department by department and developed a chart of their particular needs. And so we looked at their furniture, their filing needs, any special requirements that they had, and we produced a chart for each one. And this particular chart is a summary of those. And so for each department, we've listed the amount of square footage required. We did have, for example, in the town offices, this one item, common rooms. And I've broken this out here. So that would include the public hearing room with 100 seats, 2 6-seat conference rooms, the mail room with a copier. And we also have been discussing about a central administration desk. When people come into the building, there's somebody there to say, oh, this department's over in, at this point in the building. So it will help the public find their way through and also answer any basic questions. And then to have a staff break room. And so right now we've included the staff break room, for example, in the town offices. And we need a little bit more discussion as far as whether or not certain departments should have a little break area like a refrigerator and a coffee pot. But that's sort of minimal square footage, but that's one thing that we do need to figure out. And the other thing is we've documented all the basement storage in townhouse and in some of the other buildings as well. And we've now got to take what's there and convert it into a storage system so we can figure out how much in the way of square footage we need, and also whether or not all those documents are necessary. I mean, we did find a number of items in the basement said scanned on them. So whether there's still a requirement that they be stored or whether they can be disposed of because they're scanned, we haven't found that out yet. So anyway, we grouped the town offices and then we separated the permitting departments, the conservation planning, building and zoning, Board of Health, in as much that those all have a connection together. So if we are trying to fit departments in particular buildings and what have you, we thought breaking out that group of departments might give us some flexibility and might open up some opportunities, or it can be grouped together in with the town offices as well. So we just broke out those two separate numbers. So the first column of numbers is the existing net square feet. The amount of use chart we then added in the square footages and came up with a total of net square feet that's needed. So you'll notice there's about 1,000 square foot difference in the town offices. And then for the other departments, which are a little bit more straightforward, we took their space and developed the net square footage for each of those. For each of those particular departments. The library I'll talk about in a moment. But again, we went through the same process. Then we also have the last two columns are gross square feet. And this is to, if, for example, you were going to build a new building for a department, depending on how large that building is, you might have an additional 20% for toilet rooms, corridors, mechanical rooms, that sort of thing, or it could be as high as 30%. So we've given a range for building size. This is kind of a good summary chart. You'll note the net difference between the existing square footage and the proposed square footage is about 10,000 feet. And like I say, there is the storage to be added into this, but that's kind of the order of magnitude that we're looking at. Next one, Courtney. Now, a couple of buildings are a little bit different. I'll do the easy one first, which is Public Works. Their space works pretty well. They don't have a great deal of need. All they're looking for is 2 additional bays for equipment in the garage area and a renovation of part of a storage room to create an office. So rather than provide a lot of information on this one, we put in those 2 particular items for that and separated it from the rest of the project. The library also was a little bit different. When I first spoke with the library, they mentioned that they have thoughts about applying for a library grant. Unfortunately, I checked with the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, and their best guess is that they would be accepting applications in about 5 years, because they still have a lot of libraries to build under the old grant round. And just from personal experience, when you do the grant application, it can take from 4 to 5 years to get the library built. So we were looking at maybe, in the area of about 10 years to get the library constructed. So I looked at another option, and this is a site plan here. This is very preliminary, so I apologize. But we started off with the setback line along the side of the property next to the cemetery. And we said, okay, what can we put in there? And it's about 3,000 square feet we could add on to the side of the building. It keeps the prominence of the original historic building in the front. And it would be, I would anticipate it just being an upper level expansion. The other thing that could be looked at if the shape, for example, didn't work out, is the fact that it is a cemetery next door, and it might be possible to get a waiver on the setback line. But I haven't had any discussions yet with zoning on that. But that certainly could be another option if we wanted to, move the addition further out. There would also, if you're expanding the building, you'd need to provide some parking areas. So I just took 1 row of parking in the driveway and put it up on a slightly higher elevation in the rear, and said, okay, that's maybe where we could put a parking area if we were to do an on-site library expansion. So what I assumed was that we would expand a little bit further than the setback, and that could give us about a 4,400 square foot expansion, which when you, a net square foot expansion, which if you add that to the existing square footage, it gives you about 13,500 square feet. Again, really not too far off from the library grant process, but it might be something that might you could consider earlier on and save on escalation costs. Next one, here we go. So in sort of a quick summary here, we finished our assessment of the spaces. We figured out that with the current space that's available in the town buildings, we're about 10,000 square feet short of where we would need to be. So we'd certainly have to look at renovation and addition with those current buildings. And also in our conversations, some locations, or at least some departments, are not well suited to their current location. And I'll give an example of the youth and family who are sharing the South Union building with recreation. And they're sort of having families come in that it really should be a lot more confidential. And so, you know, people, there's no strong separation between the two groups. And so it would be nice if they had their own separate entrance within a building, just as an example, so that people had that level of privacy. Courtney?
I apologize. I have to mute. I have a little 5-year-old running around close to bedtime. So, just looking ahead a little bit, we just want to highlight what we were talking about. You know, we gave an example of a few different areas, but we're going to open this up for discussion and talk about any of the departments that you'd like in terms of what we've gathered thus far. But right now we've gone all the way to item 9 here, and we've usable floor areas for existing buildings, and we've started item 10 in terms of developing a chart showing different scenarios and options for the town's needs. So that's an in-progress item, and we weren't ready to show that tonight. But once we meet with you again, we're going to be able to have those gelled a lot more, and they're going to look a lot better than what they do now in terms of appropriateness for the town. So we'd like to kind of review anything that you have questions about tonight, get your feedback on what we have thus far. We did send a couple other things, including the proximity chart. And I believe we have the program chart also included in there, and another document that I can bring up if we want to look at that. But we will need feedback at least one more time on these options, and then we're going to head towards gelling that report and putting that together for you as well. And if you need, or you would like to see an example of a report that we've done before, we could definitely bring hard copy by the townhouse and something that you could take a look at in terms of the formatting of it and make sure that you're okay with what we're presenting in terms of deliverables. So with that, thank you for your time thus far. And if you'd like me, I can bring up those other spreadsheets as well, and we can take a look at those if you had any questions on them. We could flip back in this presentation as well.
So Courtney, why don't we, I'm gonna have you unscreen share for a second, and then obviously be ready to re-screen share if a particular member's question leads to you needing to pull up additional data. My preference, unless someone disagrees in the committee, is I don't think we should go down into any individual department level detail in this discussion. This is mainly meant to be an update. I think Courtney and Ken, you've made me aware that you have additional details of like how you got to some of those summary slides. We have a bunch of detail oriented folks. I think if we can get all of that to look at like in between meetings, just so folks can start to grasp, you know, why did recreation go up? But I thought, oh, this department should have gone up, but it's staying static, right? So that people can digest that and come back with questions at the next time. Because I think what I have found from at least the prior space studies that I've been involved with is it's an iterative process. And depending upon which options we start to go down, some of the questions may be moot or really important in terms of not only the financial impact of any of these decisions, but where these buildings should and could be. I guess maybe some initial questions before I go around the horn is, can you just highlight when you talked about kind of the 10,000 additional net square footage, when talking to departments in terms of, you talk to a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives, probably a lot that don't have the background that you all have. How did you frame it to them in terms of number of years the space should satisfy that department's needs?
Well, we were looking at 15 years for the overall projection, which, you know, I have to admit, a lot of departments were, you know, that was a long time for them, you know. as far as projecting out 15 years. But I also thought that they kind of took a realistic approach, because they were thinking about changes down the road. You know, it's something, so, you know, particularly like storage, they were definitely in the mode that down the, you know, as time goes on, files are going to diminish. But you still have that period until those files diminish that you've got to keep that filing cabinet there. But it was really more to do with, I think the biggest item we heard about was temporary help, the accommodation of temporary help at busy periods of time. That was a seemed like a theme we heard more than once. But in general, I thought they were, you know, quite modest in their requests for additional space.
Yeah, recreation was a good example of, you know, they have 2 full-time people and 1 half-time person. And when we asked them, do you anticipate having anyone in the future, you know, or expanding what you have now? They said, well, most likely what we're going to have is this half-time person become a full-time person. So we'll still need the same education, but, you know, there's the level of flexibility there. You still have a desk, you still have a space, but you're, you know, changing if it's half-time or full-time. And the school district was also really, I guess, optimistic in terms of, we like having a temp space, but we tend to change hats more than we, you know, bring on tons of people. So the jobs and the roles tend to change is what we heard versus bringing on more and more people that would need more space.
All right, I have a bunch of comments that I'm going to save for the end based on where the committee goes. So anyone want to go first? You just want me to go around the horn? All right, Joe, I'm going to start with you.
I think I had one concern sort of at a macro level when we're doing this and you're determining, you know, the overall need for space versus space we have. I'm always thinking about the fact that not all space is equal. And so, although there may be space for something to happen in a building, that doesn't mean either logistically, but maybe even practically, it just shouldn't be there. For instance, the gym on the 3rd floor of rec. You know, it might be adequate space for a gym, but the space height may not really be useful. So therefore, you know, how are you going to translate that into the final report of space that, although it's there, really isn't good usable space for a specific department?
I think that would be partially reflected in our options, right? When we talk about our options and when we explain it, we would say, look, we're not keeping this department here because of points A, B, and C. And that would be a good example of one. I don't think, you know, so far we've did South Union is a good place for the rec department to stay for multiple reasons. Accessibility issues is another one. So, I mean, yes, it's a gym space that you're getting on an upper floor, but it's also not accessible. So it's one of those things that I think will be reflected in the report and in discussion. Like Jason said, this is an iterative process. So these are the kind of questions that we'd like to hear.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Joe? I saw you go on mute, so I'm assuming you're done. Andrew?
Yeah, kind of picking up on what Joe, I mean, I think it would be beneficial probably for recreation and probably senior center to kind of break out the recreation department and council on aging versus the senior center and any recreational facilities. You know, I don't know if a gymnasium in the same office as the staff is a requirement. I think, you know, probably activity space would be nice because some of them might facilitate it, but a lot of that's done by volunteers or temporary staff. So, you know, could be in a separate building, but I think there's kind of, you know, spaces used by town residents, and then there's spaces used by town employees. So I think it'd be good to kind of separate those two out. One of the ones that kind of jump out at me a little bit was like Board of Health, and I think looking at the spreadsheets would be good, because 1,200 square feet seems like a lot for 4 people. I mean, that's, you know, the good size offices that in your spreadsheet are 150 square feet, and the conference rooms, you know, upwards, you know, on a big size, 200 square feet. So I would be looking at more like 800. So unless, I mean, they could be looking to add significantly more employees, which is what that might entail. But again, that would be good to know the numbers behind there.
I think one of the issues, if I can interrupt, one of the issues with that department was they have quite a bit of filing in that storage room at the end. And again, if we can do more of a centralized filing area that they're close to, then we could move that out into the into that centralized file system, and reduce their square footage that way.
Yeah, I think it would be good to know from that, Mark, probably an analysis on how much of that can be digitized and destroyed, and how much can be sent to Iron Mountain offsite, or how much can be in a repository somewhere in one of our other, maybe the building over by South Union used to be the fire station or something, someplace else that we can just, have dead storage. But, adding on to the town hall to make room for storage is not probably the best use of taxpayer dollars. And then the only other one that I always thought when we talked about the library, that was an interesting addition possibility, because I'm assuming that those additions to the side for the library would be just second floor additions because it's into a hill. I always thought doing a second floor addition out the back over the parking lot and just putting covered parking underneath the building. So just do a second floor addition, on pylons would be a interesting and probably good use of space, because you wouldn't lose the parking.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's enough headroom there. We'd have to check that. Yeah.
Well, I was also told there was an underground river running under part of that property as well.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't want to put a foundation there, Joe. I'd rather put parking.
Anything else, Sandra?
That's it.
Can I assume, to Andrew's point, we'll show also where, conference spaces have been assumed, right? And depending upon what options you come back with potential building configurations, obviously a department may have their own conference room now, but in a future iteration, they may not, because there would be additional spaces potentially available for use by many. It just,
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, Karen, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah. So what are the primary drivers of the need for an additional 10,000 in square footage space? Is it, additional services that the town offers, more town residents, or what are the primary drivers of the need for the extra space?
It would be, just thinking,
I can bring back the spreadsheet if you want. Or Mike, I do. 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, we could, but it's, I mean,
just in a general sense.
Well, everyone's different, but let's say, for example,
If you go to the slide. I just want to direct everyone. I know Courtney maybe not be able to bring it up, but it's in our packet, right? That 1-page slide, 5,000 of it relates to the library, approximately. And 5,000 relates to everyone else in between. I think a good chunk of that was a gymnasium for recreation, which I think we've heard from them many times about indoor space. And then my review of it really showed a lot of, couple hundred here, couple hundred there sort of situations, and in some reductions. Like I think, Ken, you had mentioned, right? There were some that were oversized because they just got told to fit to a space, right?
Right. You get an office that's, got an existing space, and that office fills that space. And so you might end up with a 300 square foot office compared to, 175 square feet or something like that.
Mhm. Okay, and I guess my only other comment is seconding Andrew's thoughts about digitizing files and, possibly sending them off-site until they are digitized or they time out in terms of number of years you need to keep them. I know I went through a large office move a few years ago into a much smaller space, and it was a massive undertaking, but it saves a lot of money in square footage.
Yeah, unfortunately, some files have to be kept forever. It's just one of those things. And others rotate. You can keep them for a certain number of years, and then
Right.
you can go. But by that time, you've got the next batches come in, and so you don't. You have a static area that's required for the files because they're changing every 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, well, I would think they're mostly electronic these days, though, right?
No.
Well, I think it depends on the department.
Yeah.
Our planning department is still very much on paper, as an example, at least based on the experience I had. I think there's Mark. I'm just trying to think. There was like 8 digitized. That is one digitized copy and 8 hard copies for every meeting set of drawings.
Yeah,
for every project.
Yeah, I think the majority of the departments prospectively are electronic. It's all the older stuff.
Yeah.
And just a couple of comments. I think that back to Andrew's point that he originally raised, we did have a tentative plan with Station 2, the old Fire Station 2, that DPW is now using to renovate that space out into a repository. It made a lot of sense, but again, it really wasn't something that we took to the next level of really planning, because there were other things that came before it, and then it just kind of, fell to the wayside. The one other point that I will make, I think, Andrew, again, I'm a speaker or two behind because Andrew, I should have jumped in with it after Andrew, but in terms of recreation and council on aging, the reason that their programming space works so well together is because a lot of the senior programming is in the morning and early afternoon, and a lot of the recreation programming is after school gets out. And so, you can use the same space for 2 different types of needs for a lot of the programming and that. And so, in other communities I've been in where you've had a senior center and a rec department that have shared space, it's worked out really well. Because the 2 interests don't necessarily cross. They do sometimes, but but more often than not, it's a good use of the same space for 2 different needs.
And Mark, maybe just to pile on to Karen and Andrew's questions on records, is there, based on your knowledge of public records law, for every department, is there a defined criteria of whether you, like, I'm assuming like town clerk indefinitely for some of his current documents, but like documents, let's just say you've accumulated as town administrator, how long you have to keep certain documents for they're in hard copy? Like, do you feel like you have the rules of the road that if someone were to do an analysis of digitization versus offsite versus on-site, that you have the rules of the road, or is there any sort of vagueness there?
I think we have a pretty good handle on the rules of the road. A lot of the files in my office, procurement, things of that, they tend to be about 7 years. Records with benefits and payroll tend to be forever. And the preservation of some of those records becomes an issue with some of the, when Ken went down to the basement, we have an old green bar, but the green bar has been down there so long, it looks like it just came out of the box. All the ink is kind of worn away on it. So there are some things that you do need to keep forever. There are some quirky ones. We did have a question recently raised by Youth and Family for some case file notes. How long we need to keep those. That was a little bit tricky. We got counsel involved in that one. And, but yeah, for the most part, Jason, I think the rules are pretty clear cut as to what needs to be kept for how long, whether it's a permanent record or whether after it's been digitized, we're able to dispose of the hard copy.
Another interesting area was the permitting departments, because conservation will get a set of plans, planning will get a set of plans, the building official will get a set of plans, and they've all got, if they can consolidate those, and I'm not sure what the laws are on that, I can sort of do a little research, but if those can be consolidated, it might be possible to minimize the number of those records that are kept.
Right, because the only difference is the signed page on the front, right? So planning will sign their page, and
Right.
conservation signs their page, but the rest of the documents are all exactly the same.
Yeah. And so if those departments were together, they would have equal access to those documents. So, that's one other possibility.
Karen, did you have anything else?
No.
All right, thank you. Jeff?
Okay, so a couple of questions. So on the Public Works Edition, the 1,740, can you just repeat what that was? Was that like garage space? Or was that a factor in what you talked to them about?
That was the garage space.
Okay, because I know we've had discussions with them in the past, and some vehicles may not have as long of a life given our limited garage space. So I think that would be important to factor in. Seems like it did.
Yeah. I also, on that one, I did go out and take a good look at the site to see whether or not, if we put an addition on, whether there's enough space to get the driveway around the end of the building. And there's some unusual things going on back there. I got to kind of draw that up and see how we can make it work.
Great. This wasn't my question, but the point that Mark made, I thought was a good one about just the need, the timing, or the time of day needs, and how that factors into your overall puzzle, I guess, if you will. That, to me, I thought that was a really good point. So I don't know how that's factored in here, but that was just something to chew on. The other thing I had was, it'd be helpful, maybe this is more of a next step thing, but to understand kind of what our square footage is at play. I don't have the numbers in front of you, like a Woodward, how much space we have in there, because it'd be helpful to understand kind of what the needs are versus what our other spaces in town that we potentially could use for those purposes.
We specifically told them they can't do that yet. We need to
Okay.
wait for this. We need to honor the process that the school's
Okay.
undertaken. So, but Woodward is a 70,000 square foot facility.
And the last question, just maybe the methodology on the adjacencies and kind of what questions you ask and how much does that factor into the usable net square footage? Because you might have space in the building, but it doesn't make sense to put one department in the building versus
Right. That's really from a planning standpoint. When we get near the end of this and we start to look at where things should go within a building, that will help us organize the building so it meets the various department needs.
We did assess adjacencies during our interviews too, to see, who needs to be next to each other and what's most important. I guess, the superintendent's office is kind of interesting because they like being central to both districts versus just not necessarily the center of town, like all the other town offices. So that one's a little bit challenging if we want to make sure that they are, central, or, the other option is if they're not central, do they have easy access to, a highway or something that they can get out to Northborough quickly?
Oh, thank you.
Maybe I'll just add on one item to Jeff's question on the DPW. Those two bays are in addition to continuing to use the space at what we commonly refer to as Station 2. on the south side of town near South Union? Or is that to replace those two spots that they currently occupy?
Well, there wasn't, I didn't hear about two additional spaces in the south part of town. So that's something I need to look into.
I would just ask Karen what her working assumption was there. So she
Oh.
has an old fire station, so that stores two vehicles on the south side of town. It's very close to South Union School, in a town-owned building that was referenced. I think Andrew might have said it as a potential dead records spot.
Okay.
And Jason, Jeff brought up something that kind of piqued my curiosity too, is in our corporation space planning that we're doing now, everything is hoteling. So nobody gets really assigned desks because people are working remotely 2 or 3 days a week. And we're kind of shifting how we operate. Courtney, how much of that is taken into consideration here, that in the next 15 years, people might not be working from an office 30, 40 hours a week. And some of these people that want temporary spaces, how much of that is hoteling space that could be used by multiple departments? And I think, also looking at, okay, we have a conference room. How often is the conference room used? Or, we have a activity space that we only use it during the day because we're senior center, but during the evening, it could be used by other people. So I think kind of the frequency of the space requested and maybe hours would be helpful to see if there's ability to share it amongst different departments. And then does everybody need an office? We just got rid of our corporation. No more offices. Everybody's an open floor plan. Certain departments, I'm sure Board of Health can't do that, but other departments, would it make more sense to go to more of an open floor plan with less office space? But as kind of companies go that way.
Well, we really didn't get into, well, even though there was a discussion on occasion about, the changes that have occurred due to COVID. There wasn't any distinct direction as far as, the department can work from home or anything. I think that's more of a policy decision that we would need to be informed of in order to make that part of the mix. We are doing, for example, in the townhouse, we are planning on having 2 separate conference rooms that all the departments can utilize. So we're trying to sort of overcome each department having their own conference area and what have you.
I think it's a good question. It's a good discussion point that we can, kind of dig into a little bit and make sure that everybody's been thinking about that. I know it's hard with some departments, you have to be there and, you physically have to be in the seat and you have to be there to respond to people or to work with certain people. But I think it's a good question and something that we should definitely look into.
Yeah. I think the only one, economic development, economic development, which is sort of a part-time position, they seem to be the most flexible department, but that's only one person. So, yeah, I'm not sure how that will work, but okay.
I think the easiest thing to respond to that is, I think we should continue down a path of assuming no change. Right, that's your worst case in terms of space needs. And then, Mark, maybe I task you for, I'm pretty sure there's been recent discussion about remote working policies at the BOS level. I mean, I think Ken said it. I think it's a policy decision, right? And I get that board circulates, circles through every year essentially. but I think just some direction on, what parameters they may consider, I think would be helpful. But then I think the other thing that I think, because of the validity of the comment, is Ken and Courtney, if it makes the difference of adding a couple hundred square feet, right, of, hey, we see, these spaces could be shared or not shared, et cetera. I think that's important. Obviously, there's some departments that have been cited here that just are never going to have that ability unless something, outside of our imaginations change. But I think we do need to present a range of solutions, not just a one size fits all, given how much everything has changed in the last 2 years for all of us. The other item I was going to expand upon, I think, Jeff, this goes back to some of your comments, was Ken said something about the land at DPW when he was reacting to some of your comments about the garage bays. Ken, I probably talking to Mark, but I might have some stuff. That site was looked at for a public safety facility. There's a significant amount of land behind it. There's also a lot of wetlands. Is probably what you're referring to. So there's a lot of land that isn't developed on that parcel that is potentially available if that was an option that we're looking at. But I also kind of wanted to know what the immediacy, did you get a sense of, I guess, more broadly than just DPW? Like, was anyone sitting there in your meeting saying, my needs are quote unquote immediate and really need to be dealt with in the next 1 to 2 years? Or did you get the sense that most of the responses you're getting were more I know you gave them the 15-year parameter, but like they were more like 5 to 10 years. It'd be nice to see this done, knowing that municipal government just tends not to work at the same pace as private sector.
I don't know there was an expression of an immediate need, but there were there was some difficulties, and I know I've mentioned youth and family a few times tonight, but they keep coming to mind here as an example, where they have they've got 3 spaces right now. Each of them are different size, and they're all meant to be counseling families. So they kind of lack the furniture needs, but they're making do right now. And then they have 2 interns that will come in during the summer. And they're meant to be doing the same thing, same interviewing process and what have you. So it's there, and all they have is an open office desk. They don't have an office per se where they can have a private conversation. So, I mean, even though it wasn't expressed as an immediate need, it seems based upon the kinds of work that they're doing with families that they have an immediate need, for privacy, to make the rooms large enough that they can do their job. Now, I don't have a good handle on the scheduling, how many people come in during a day, or how many families come in during a day, and is there some sharing that could occur? I think that would be worth exploring a little bit more. But it's those are the sort of the tricky ones where you've got summer interns that need private space. Now, if they were in with the town office, maybe it could be a conference room that they could use, but then they probably wouldn't have the privacy that they would normally expect. So, that example probably could use a little bit more research to determine whether that need is immediate, and also the demand for those office areas.
So Is there any other questions for this evening before I try to summarize some potential next steps so we get to kind of meeting 2 with Ken and Courtney? All right, so Ken and Courtney, I'm going to start with a question to you. You mentioned that you're working on options to come back to the committee of like how to fit these space needs, but you've also told us if we bought in on everything that the departments have told you, don't pressure test anything further, there's about 10,000 net square footage that is not currently available in any of our buildings. So is there direction that we can provide, hopefully on a consensus basis here tonight, for you to enable your scenario planning is really the question. And then where I'm going to go based on your response is kind of what constituent groups, definitely thinking library board of trustees, just for the benefit of the committee, we're going to have some further conversations with so that we can inform this analysis. But maybe I'll start with the answer, any answer to that question, Ken or Courtney.
Well, I personally think it's helpful to know that there's certain things or certain transitions that are not advisable just because they've been tested before or they've been assessed before. We know that this is not something that the town wants to go forward with. So if there's something that we're targeting certain spaces and based on sheer square footage, programmatically, does it work? Does it make sense for adjacencies? Those types of things. So if there's any, parameters that we need to be following that we may not be aware of, that's the stuff we need to know tonight.
The other thing, we've only just started to pull these options, look at options. And so basically we've taken the list of buildings with the available square feet, and then we're plugging in, well, this department will fit into that building. Or if we put these 2 departments together, they'll fit into that one. And so by doing that, we're going to end up with a bunch of options. But one thing that sort of we noticed almost immediately is this need for additional space and or doing in addition to a building. So we've got that sort of overflow category, which right now we're calling new or other space. And that could mean actually it wouldn't be that would be either a new building or an existing building that we're not aware of that we can use. Because it's really working with puzzle pieces in some respects, trying to fit them into the buildings. And it becomes pretty obvious when you're doing that, well, this isn't going to work. Or this isn't going to work. Or we don't like that department within that building for a number of reasons. So there will be a number of options that we come up with. And I don't know, I think if there are any buildings that you wanted to discount, I think we can probably discover that when we go through the charts. Just because they won't be suitable for many uses. It's my feeling.
Yeah, Ken, one of my thoughts was almost separating the library. So our library is deed restricted to only being a library. So, and that's 6,500 of the 10,000 square feet is the library. So it's almost, the library is a standalone space issue, of which we have the discussion of, do we, expand the library or build a new library? But then we're left with the library building that can only be used as a library. I think to Jason's point of discussion with the library trustees on the only other option I could think of is that we have a satellite location somewhere. I don't know. one of the schools or recreation building or senior center where we have a auxiliary library, if that would satisfy their space needs, but I think they wanted everything in one building. So if that's the case, everything in one building, the library is kind of, I don't think we're going to put the building department in the library. It's already at capacity. And we wouldn't expand that building to put in another town office. So it's kind of its own standalone separate analysis, right? And then that kind of takes an option away, right? And your puzzle becomes a little easier because you don't have that as a piece.
Oh, Andrew, I'll take it a step further, and maybe it's stating the obvious, but I think DPW would also fit in that category.
Yeah, unless you wanted to put like the building department there or something.
But that would require an addition, right, Ken? I think you're telling us they
That would
need more
require an
space
addition or a new building on
with
that site.
existing
Yeah.
operations. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So maybe that one's not as obvious. I'll throw out. So, Andrew, I'm 100% on board with your library synopsis. Right. I think it's a further discussion that's beyond the scope of our committee. I would recommend, Ken and Courtney, that you heard the introduction, right, that I kind of brought before you on the agenda. So Andrew and Joe are working on the South Union School in terms of whether that could become affordable housing. So I think any scenario we have should have a with and a without South Union being in a town municipal building in the future for municipal departments. Until they tell us that that's the path we're going forward, it's going to become affordable housing or sold to a third party. And then I would say, obviously, the school administration currently occupies Neary School. I do not think we should think about any permutation where if they were to move to a more central location, moving another department in there, because the fate of Neary is it's either going to be closed due to consolidation, expanded, in rehabbed, renovated, or built new. Like those are the options that are on the table for that building. And if it's built new, it's going to be built as like a school for whatever the standards are today. So I don't think if we're going to swap the school administration out and find them another spot, I don't think it would be prudent for us to be spending any time trying to move someone else in there, as appealing as it is, given that they do have a separate entrance, et cetera. It's as you probably saw in that space, it's not that cordoned off from the school itself, right? And those are obviously well-vetted employees that are walking through there.
I think that's an interesting factor because if we pull Neary square footage out of the equation, it's going to change our net difference, so our net difference could change significantly actually from that 10,000.
Well, that's, I think, why I'm pointing it out and wanting consensus of this committee, because unless I'm missing something, I just don't see why you would swap out that 5,000 square feet for the school administration with some other need for the town based on the age of the building and what we've been talking about mission here.
Mhm.
Is we wouldn't lose it. We would just single use it like the library. It's just, again, another puzzle piece. You wouldn't put something else in there.
Right, but then what's saying is if that comes out of, if you take that puzzle piece away, right? Now you've reduced that left side of your chart. You have less existing square feet. We got to move them somewhere. So I think, Courtney, what you're saying is your 10,000 becomes 15,000 or 16,000 in that particular example, right?
Yeah.
Another one, I don't know whether or not you guys, I don't know if this is in your scope, but it might be interesting to know, or more just anecdotally, how many of the departments are operating more of a traditional office space type of function where they don't necessarily, like we could, get commercial office space, which is readily available in town. How many don't have the public coming in or need to be near something or something of that nature that are basically using it as office space that we could look at, renting office space, which is in vast majority in this town right now. Just a thought. It might not have been in your scope, but it would be an interesting thing to know.
No, I was looking at the chart, just a list of departments, scanning through, trying to think of who doesn't have someone coming in to see them. And I think the one that I targeted was probably just the IT. I mean, one's running to everybody else, right? So,
Or something, youth and family services, maybe that could be in a office building or a medical office building kind of a thing where, they're used to people coming in for appointments. Something of that nature, just to think outside the box a little bit.
Andrew, I would look at the price of rental commercial space, as abundant as it is, and think about that in the context of a town budget for a next meeting. Because I think there was brief analysis of this last year when it was even more abundant during the pandemic, when we thought we may have to find a home for youth and family and recreation on a temporary basis. The numbers was actually pretty surprising, at least to me. So I don't have it at my fingertips, so I'm not going to try to misquote it, but I think that would be an interesting data point for everyone to weigh in on. My preliminary analysis was it was cost prohibitive, but maybe the market has turned. I'm not a real estate professional.
I think at that point it was cost prohibitive because we had the space versus if we had to do an addition or a new building.
Right.
That was kind of my thought, is if we had to build an addition or buy a new building and build a new building to accommodate it, maybe a rental in this time frame would be a better solution.
So I guess Ken and Courtney, I'm going to throw something out there so that we can help you advance, but I think we're also holding you back a little bit by not giving you access to additional buildings to at least look at, right? I mean, I think we've floated some topics. I kind of shut the conversation a little bit down from when Jeff went down one rabbit hole, but we're really close. So does it make sense for you to get clarification on some of these loose points that have come up during this meeting? If you didn't get them all down, this gets posted to YouTube tomorrow that you can watch over and over again. While we kind of work as a town to figure out what options we may be able to give you. Because I think we talked about this when we were going through the contracting phase, that we may get to a point where we give you 5 options, or we give you 1 option, or we say we need help finding an option to make this work. And I don't have a crystal ball to know where it may or may not go, but I think at least what I've heard tonight is there's the potential we need additional space outside of our existing buildings. And if we look to eliminate any of these buildings, the space needs get exacerbated. But I think it also would allow us time to go have a separate conversation with the library board and get their temperature on whether they're going to wait for the state building library construction period to come around, or whether they want us to continue to think about an addition on the existing site. Because I think for the benefit of my fellow committee members, depending on where that conversation goes, drastically changes potentially whether we take a left turn, go straight down the road, or take a right turn in terms of timing of capital, right? If they're going to say we'll deal with it in 10 years, 5 to 10 years, then we're dealing with a 5,000 square foot problem, give or take, some of the other puzzle pieces we talked about. Versus if they say, no, we'd like it considered as part of a broader package. Well, is that in the best interest of the town? I think that's what we need to look at, right? Is bundling these things into, one contractor, maybe it's different sites, but getting the efficiencies of one OPM, one designer to be able to see the whole thing through. I'd like to know that answer is 1 vote. So I think that's a conversation we need to have. So I'll pause there, and then I have another conversation I think we need to have. All right, so my to-do on that one is I'm going to reach out to the library director and the chair of the library board to either invite them to our meeting or to figure out when their meeting is and either go as the chair or post a joint meeting, depending upon whether people want to go. The other 2 conversations I think we need to have are master plan. So I candidly have not followed that process. And I wish Lisa was here to weigh in. But I want to make sure that obviously anything that may come through in a final report there, which my understanding is that's not too far down the pike here, that if there is something that someone's planning to implement from that, that we haven't missed it by the population that we gave Ken and Courtney access to as part of the space needs. So I know in particular, Mr. Healy has floated the concept of a community center, which I think has often included in certain master plan circles, a community pool. Well, that's not part of this, right? Should it be part? Should it not be part? You know, no one has talked to Ken and Courtney about that. So I just want to make sure that if there are things that are going to be in that master plan that aren't being considered by our space needs, we need to be very clear about that up front to people that would vote on any of these projects so that they know it's really not in the crystal ball picture for the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm going to ask Lisa, or I'll reach out to Mimi, the chair, just to figure out how best to do that. I don't think that's as easy because I don't think they finalized their report, but you know, that pool concept continues to come up every conversation I've had with anyone in town about capital, but I think recreation is candidly not pushing it because of the operational aspect of it. So that leads me to my other constituencies is I think we need a conversation with Council on Aging. The reason I say that's twofold. We'll talk about in the later part of our meeting, FY23 capital planning and where people are at in submissions. And I think just as a courtesy to them, they've obviously been put off a few years while this process has started and gone on, and asked if it's not been available to deal with the space needs. But I think either attending one of their meetings or bring them up to speed on what is envisioned in this plan is going to be really important, because what I also don't want to have happen is we present a comprehensive plan, but someone advances another plan with a building that's outside of our plan. And because they don't think we got the right level of consensus, it kind of puts a wrinkle into everyone else's efforts. So I don't think that one's as much of a left turn, straight turn, right turn as the library conversation may be. But I do think it's for the sake of completeness, making sure we are dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I've candidly gotten a few emails from members of the Council on Aging and phone calls in the last week that make me think that they don't fully understand the process we're undergoing. And I just want to make sure that we're being as clear as possible. The final group I think that we'll naturally have in as part of our capital planning process is recreation. And they have told us time and time again about interior space for those that have been on the committee since the beginning. And I kind of want them here in a public meeting live to make sure that they agree that what Ken and Courtney have put on a piece of paper in terms of their interior needs are what they need, and there aren't going to be additional needs that come outside of that in the time window we're talking about, and that we are putting our best foot forward all at once as opposed to in pieces, because I don't think the pieces naturally work. So those are my proposed next steps, as opposed to sending Ken and Courtney down a road that may lead to no path. So I'd welcome feedback on that.
Jason, one thought, is Sam on master plan? I think he is for some reason. I wasn't sure if you wanted to ask him.
I think he is. So if he wants to weigh in, he's more than welcome to raise his hand. I'd be happy to bring him in. There he is.
Yeah, Jason,
Hi, Sam.
thanks. I guess I would defer to Lisa on all of the master plan stuff. She's a point person for the selectmen. And again, I've not discussed any of this with her, so I don't want to speak out of turn here. And again, I think that she's the right person to talk to in terms of some of these other pieces as well. So I hate to kick the can down the road, but
That's okay. Appreciate you raising your hand.
I'm not authorized to speak for anybody, so I will try to keep that in mind. So,
okay.
But again, I think this is, again, very helpful, and I certainly concur with taking a comprehensive view and including the other groups that you mentioned to make sure that as much as we can, that we all are more or less aligned and at least informed about what's happening on some of these various tracks. So that's, to me, very worthy goal. So That's all I got here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. All right. Any other reaction?
I think you bring up a good point in the fact we do have a bunch of moving pieces. It's going to be a little impossible for them to account for the potential moves that may be made that can't be made until we cross the bridges that we're going to have to go with schools and with South Union. So and not to preclude when you talked about extra space. I mean, I wouldn't say I want to take inventory out of the commercial market, but it may behoove the town actually to buy a building if we're going to need it for 5 or 10 year period. It might behoove us to actually purchase and use what we've been using as rental money as sort of mortgage payments on it, and then selling it back off into the inventory later when the market's good. That I don't want to throw us in a rabbit hole in that direction. I'm just saying that I just want to expound that I agree with you. There are lots of moving parts here, and I don't think that we can hold them accountable to those specific rabbit holes that we're all going to have to go down.
Kinley, I want to get also our biggest bang for our buck. I don't want plans out there that aren't going to benefit us. So I'd rather, if we're going to have Ken and Courtney draw something up, I'd rather it be a potentially viable plan that's going to be subject to some refinement, but not a complete overhaul. All right. Any other feedback on those next steps before we let Ken and Courtney enjoy the rest of their evening? All right. I appreciate both of you coming. I guess if you have any questions, certainly circle back with Mark or myself, and we'll try to get these conversations moving here in the next week or two, subject to obviously these boards being available to meet.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Take
Have a good
care.
night.
Yeah.
You too. All right. Next item is ongoing capital project updates. So I'm going to keep this on the agenda moving forward. There may be no updates, but just to honor kind of the other part of our charge. The townhouse OPM contract, so Central Mass Projects, my understanding is that is done. And moving forward to a designer RFQ process, which I believe will be in the next, my understanding is that's going to be about a 6-week turnaround to get that all rolling. The fire department tender has not been ordered. We've also not received a grant for it yet. Those grants continue to roll out on a weekly basis every Friday morning. FEMA awards more. Of interesting note, the town of Milford got a $400,000 grant for a tender truck awarded, I believe, in 2 or 3 weeks ago. And there have been a significant number of vehicle acquisition grants awarded to area departments recently. A theme continues to be, and this is in line with the insight that Chief Achilles had received early on, those that are replacing apparatus, i.e. this is not a replacement, have fared better. So they've been using the age part of it. So it's just a theme. Chief Achilles will be on our agenda to talk about his FY23 and beyond capital soon, likely potentially our next meeting. So I'm going to have a separate agenda topic on the tender because I think it's almost designed and ready to be ordered. And I think consistent with the committee's vote, and Karen, we can walk you through some of the history on this one when we get there. I think we had all agreed to a conversation depending upon where the grant cycle was, because there is another grant cycle coming up in the near term that was actually funded additional money through, I don't believe it was CARES. I believe it was the package that came out in January. So more to come on that, but still crossing our fingers every Friday morning that the chief gets a nice phone call. He also has a second grant related to something that's coming in his FY23 capital plan that is not out yet. We haven't received it yet, I guess, is the best way to put it. Joe, is there any update on library interior renovations?
I can tell you what I do know. John and Ryan have been generous in meeting with me, which has been really great. I'll try and sort of list bullet points. Obviously, color and aesthetics are becoming a more poignant topic as they get closer. Apparently, it's dog eat dog out there. But in terms of the money and mechanics, John expects the carpet to come in at less than 50,000 because if it gets over the 50,000 total, then they have to go with a different allotting process to the vendors. So he expects that the vendors to keep the price under 50. They did find some dubious material in some of the tile, but apparently they can go over that. So they're not going to have to do remediation. They're going to seal it and go right over it, which is nice. Apparently there's also a little bit of material in the walls, but since they're just painting, that won't be a problem. They are also, John says that his crew has told him that they think they will do the painting on the front part of the building themselves in the front room, which may save the town up to $20,000. So that would be a significant cost savings on the project. So I'm hoping that does take place and they do that themselves because that would be great for us. And that's about it at the moment.
Okay. Any questions on any of those three updates? All right. The next is an update on capital planning responses from department heads and next steps in the process. So all departments have at least acknowledged the email that went out, and they were the responses were due on September 10th, which was last Friday. Police is fully submitted and compliant with the steps that we requested. Fire is fully compliant and consistent with the steps that we outlined. Facilities is fully submitted and compliant with the steps we outlined. Sorry. Recreation is substantially complete, but they have a few more to-dos in terms of form submissions. And I have not had a response yet on anything DPW related. And the IT director, is my understanding, is working through a final plan based on all the moving parts in that department. In addition, the Council on Aging reached out asking what they should do about their addition to Quarterville Hall, given the conversation we just went through for the last hour and a half. And I told them that they could wait a couple of weeks to see where we're at and then decide whether they're going to put something in or not. John Parent is also looking into Assabet's current timing, which may, regardless of where we go with DRA and any of their recommendations, Assabet will be a key defining factor of timing around that as well. So for a first year, I'm happy with where we're at. My next step is to take all the documentation that was received and upload it. I'm going to upload it into the share drive. Everyone used the town website. Some submitted additional information, but I think we got it all corralled in one spot, which is actually a lot better than prior years. So there's a significant amount to look through. I'm not going to lie, I have not looked at all of it. I will say that as of now, capital is trending fairly light for next year, especially compared to where we thought we may be going. But we obviously have some major things out there. I haven't heard back from DPW, and IT may or may not be covered by other funds, right? But that doesn't matter. We need to vet all capital items, and this ongoing process of facilities and schools is obviously feasibility studies, et cetera, certainly do add up if we end up having to go down that road as well. So that's the update. The next steps are really, I think I was going to invite each department head in to explain what they've submitted. What I would ask is, once we agree on our dates, if everyone can look at the materials and submit no less than 1 week before that department head comes in. If you need additional information to vet something or to answer a question that you don't think, the department head's gonna be able to answer verbally, like you need a quote or you wanted to see something else, if you could just send me a list of those questions and I'll literally, forward them to the department head, so that person comes prepared for the discussion. And I think that would be the best use of everyone's time. That makes sense? I'll try to keep it to roughly 2 an evening, given some of these are going to be longer discussions, is my guess. All right. I'm going to try to go through the carryover capital account balances review and recommendations. Mark, Brian, certainly weigh in here as we go through this. So another part of our charge that we've never had the opportunity to deal with until now is capital account balances. So obviously, any capital article that goes through at town meeting has the ability to carry over indefinitely until the money is either turned back or it's closed out. And there's a whole process related to debt financed articles, which is why you have certain tabs in here. I asked Brian, Carla, and Mark to get a listing of all those that were being carried, beyond 6/30/21, because our charge specifically asks that we make a recommendation for anything being carried beyond 1 year, but does acknowledge that certain articles should be carried beyond 1 year, such as building type projects. And I think we'll probably determine tonight that there's other reasons that other items should be carried. But I think the flip side to all of this is obviously some items shouldn't be carried year over year. So Brian worked very diligently with the department heads to get explanations of if money wasn't being turned back, i.e. closing out an old article, why it wasn't being closed out. And I think we have a responsibility. If we don't agree with what the department head is recommending, to make it known. Obviously it's a recommendation, but I think it's a start in a transparency of a process of not letting previously funded projects carry over indefinitely and maybe being subject to different interpretation and different uses at future dates. So you all have a copy of the spreadsheet that was populated. Obviously the answers are a little different based on the department head, but do you want to go one by one? Were there specific items that stood out to anyone? I'm open to any format. I had some views on a few, but I guess I'd open it up first before I go with any of my views. Anyone?
Jason, you're just trying to see whether or not any of these articles we want to chat about, basically?
Yeah, I'm basically trying to, I guess, anything that's in yellow, the department head's turning back, right? So
Yeah.
go into free cash, it'll be available for future projects. I'm really looking at the items that say encumbered to FY22 that have a balance that are carrying forward, and whether it's appropriate that they should, or whether there was something we were trying to ring fence there. I mean, I'll just give maybe Andrew an example of things that stood out to me. Were the townhouse parking lot it was approved in 4/19 of 18.
Yep.
But yet we haven't finished the work yet. We've undertaken additional paving contracts since that initial work. Like, obviously the cost of these things goes up over time. I just think we need to be finishing projects. And I realize there's, punch list items that naturally come up, but that was one that stood out to me based on a few conversations I had that I don't know that there was general awareness that anything else needed to even be done there. So I just think reviewing this process moving forward, tightening up the project timelines here are only going to help the town, because we're clearly going to pay more for whatever these items that Karen needs to do than what we would have 3 or 4 years ago, especially now.
Yeah. Yeah. The only one that really stuck out at me was the library basement. And I know John's talking about generators there, but $60,000 is a lot for a backup generator to back up the battery powered sump pumps. I mean, that could be a portable one. I mean, you don't need anything too crazy because it's already on backup. You just have to basically recharge those batteries.
Agreed. So you're not arguing necessarily, Andrew, with the potential final step there, but you're saying it's obviously not going to cost 60,000. So why don't we send
Exactly.
something back? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm completely on the same page as you. I was of the similar mindset on the DPW radio system. Clearly there's something being turned back there, so it's a little different, but now we're installing something in a truck we're just buying, which clearly wasn't around on 4/19 of 2018 and should have been budgeted into this year's capital article. So I guess I'm okay with that one for this year, but I think Mark and Brian, I know you tended to agree when we talked through the preliminary list, but I think we need to make sure department heads are aware that this stuff isn't going to carry over indefinitely without some really strong reasoning. And, we should turn it back in appropriate new stuff if we're buying new vehicles, et cetera.
Yep.
The only other item I'll just point out is, at least on this, the Articles All Funds tab that I was a little disappointed with, is the DPW sidewalk plow. I don't know what's with that 4/9 of 18 town meeting. We literally just in July of 2021 bought something that was appropriated back then. That wasn't like an inventory thing, et cetera. I gotta believe we paid more for that sidewalk plow than what was originally budgeted. And I think this is an attachment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark or Brian. It's not the actual machine, but these things have got to just be spent when they're appropriated or turned back. It's just another example of, there's nothing we can do about that one now because it sounds like we actually used that money, but.
Yeah, I think the other one that's outside of our purview, Jason, is that zoning bylaw from 2008. That's just bizarre, but yeah, outside of our purview.
You're welcome to take that to advisory.
I'll take it up with Kathy.
Hey, Jason, what is the capital maintenance article? Is that just $100,000 or so that John?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
That would make sense. Okay.
My thought there on that one, Jeff, is I'm hoping we can, when John comes in, maybe there may be a way to accelerate some of those smaller ADA items this year. And even if John needs to go hire temporary help to get some of these things done, given that he has such a carryover from last year, and I don't know what he has planned for this year, that might be something he should at least look into. Was going to be a conversation I would like to have.
Okay. The only other question I had with the sidewalks, now we're turning it back, but we have the money there. Is there anything that needs to be done, in the short term that we could use that money for rather than having to go battle for new money?
Well, I guess it probably should have been done with the last paving contract, right? But I don't think you're gonna go get a $40,000 paving contract.
I think that was one, I remember that one talking to Karen, though, that was only to be used, I think, on Parkerville. Mark and Brian, it was a specific road, and basically the engineering didn't exist to allow them to put a sidewalk there or something like that. They were.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine $50,000 doesn't cover much, but
yeah,
it's something.
But I think the warrant article was specific to the street at which it needed to go on, and that's probably why she turned it back, because then it can be appropriated for other roads.
Okay.
Brian, anything? I saw you come off mute. Brian, anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I just wanted to say he's correct. Andrew's correct.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. Any questions on the bonded projects? So just so everyone's on the same page, these are projects we've actually taken out money for and haven't spent. Mainly water funds, but there are some general fund items in here as well. And CPA items.
I think it's just Jason. Some of these are pretty old.
Yeah, it looks, I think the good news, right, is that looks like Brian is looking to take some sort of action in the spring because they do require a town meeting vote. And I know, Brian, you were getting some guidance from bond counsel on how to deal with this, given that you already kind of had the money.
Yeah, I'm sending it, in fact, I'm compiling it this week, actually, and sending it off just to have bond counsel facilitate the, the repurpose and reuse of those monies. So, like you said, a lot of it's water fund, but there are a couple other smaller articles that we're just going to clean up. And once that's done, I think we can kind of keep a good handle on that going forward. So, there's a few outliers like, the Halloween property, which I don't think CPC realized that they had to use within any kind of time frame. But I'm trying to educate as we go along here.
Brian, could these be fall town meetings so that we could have the money in free cash the following year? Like I'm thinking from the waterfront, if we needed to do Newton Street or something.
Well, the quick answer is it won't go to free cash. It'll just be going, you have to keep it with the fund. So it's going to go into the water,
Yeah.
I believe the water reserve, or more than likely we can use it on current debt that the water has and just kind of repurpose it that way. So either way, you're going to save on the rates
Okay.
at some point. But but I'm really targeting spring for that.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if it was like we'd have to wait a full year to be able to utilize the funds or if it was kind of an immediate thing.
No.
Okay.
And maybe before I go to the CPC items, it does look like if town meeting does take action on a lot of these, we'll be left with mainly CPC items because the public safety building will also close, which is going to be a combination, it appears, of additional bond rescission beyond the 3 million we've already done, which we kind of led voters to believe that would happen when we did the initial rescission, but that's actually coming to reality. But it also looks like we may also have some bond proceeds that likely won't be used for that project. So that's another 6-figure number that will be permanently rescinded. The last tab is related to CPA funds, which, to Andrew's comment, these are some really old ones. Brian and Carla reached out to CPC to see if they were willing to close any, and I think the short answer was no. Full disclosure, I don't believe, I don't know if anyone went to the meeting last week, but the video is not up there. I don't know if they actually talked about them again, but I'm assuming that they are still of the view that all of these should stay open. Other than the affordable housing ones and the ongoing project ones, I do believe that we have a responsibility to send at least a recommendation that these be further looked into, given the age. The affordable housing ones are out there for specific affordable housing needs in the future that may come up and have already been funded. But there's a lot of these projects that have been out there since 2008, 2010, 2011. Not huge numbers, but when you start adding them up, it would increase our ability to fund additional CPA projects, which we heard a lot about last year with the townhouse one, of how close they were to some of their ceilings, et cetera. So I don't feel comfortable just kind of letting this sit, but then again, we don't have authority to do anything with it. And I want to be respectful of that, but I do think our job can also be awareness. So I don't know what others think, but that's just my 2 cents.
Jason, quick question on what is the affordable housing ones? Is that on top of what we have in the housing bucket for CPA funds? So is it CPA funds that are in the housing, and then we have this additional, whatever, 160K in 2 separate articles?
I don't know if Mark or Brian want to take that one.
Probably Brian.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, they had got money from the Affordable Housing Trust years ago. And I think that's that money. That was never spent or anything, but like Jason said, they do have plans for it. So that is in the housing, it does go in the housing bucket though, that you're thinking of.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if we were double counting it or adding it.
No.
In that housing bucket, okay.
So I guess, what do we think about submitting a recommendation that this be further analyzed, scrutinized, et cetera?
Be prudent, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think especially some of this stuff that's pretty old. I don't think that it was actually in the CPC meeting, Jason, just so you know. So I think it's worth having a conversation with them.
Okay.
I mean, some of this is small, but like, you know, why not close out Breakneck Hill for $28 so it doesn't sit out there, so Brian has to report on it.
Yeah, and I think there was a recent example with some of this trying to get spent for repairs and maintenance, which I don't think is the intent of, right, given that whole memorandum of understanding discussion that we have on every project, right? And we hear every year at town meeting of how whoever the recipient is going to maintain what we're paying for. I think it kind of, you know, a little bit of back and forth. So, so the committee, everyone's on board with supporting some sort of recommendation? Okay. What about specific on the library restoration? I don't know if it's a recommendation or, Brian, whether it's something we monitor between now and town meeting, but I'm also, it appears the library restoration is running well under budget. My understanding is it's substantially complete. Maybe we haven't paid all the bills, but how would you suggest we deal with that one and try to close that out by the annual town meeting as well, to, again, just try to give CPC some flexibility in the projects that they may be able to bring forward to taxpayers moving forward?
Totally agree, Jason, on that one. I guess that the trick will be, will CPC be willing to sort of be a little quicker on that one? But I don't disagree. I did hear it was running a little.
Okay,
I can
so
certainly have a conversation with John and find out where that's going and kind of start there if you want.
okay, that'd be helpful.
Sure.
So do folks want me to draft a letter that we can vote on the next meeting, or do you want me to take this conversation, summarize it, and send it before the next meeting?
I would say one of the things too, Jason, that concerns me is that a lot of this stuff isn't really spent. You know, like Audubon program for the golf course from 2018 and invasive species at Breakneck Hill. I mean, 2017, right? You know, 75% of it remains. Was the estimate off, right? And we just, you know, to your point, it's not there for perpetuity. It's not an investment species, you know, it was a one-time invasive species removal project. It's not a ongoing maintenance fund for Breakneck Hill. So I think it's just, you know, it would be good to know where these are at, why there's still a balance. And the ones that are small should just be closed out so Brian doesn't have to track them. And the ones that are big, there should be either turning it back so we can use it on other things or an explanation on when it's going to be spent, you know, in the near future.
I'm all for the upkeep of the Wars Memorial, but there's a 2007 renovate all Wars Memorial, and there's still $615 hanging out from 2007. I don't know if there are ongoing renovations still, but I guess, you know, as you're saying, maybe it's an operations budget, not a CPA item.
Yeah.
So do you want to draft something, bring it to next meeting, or do you want me to summarize the discussion and just send it in between?
I think you could send it in between. I don't think we need to vote on it.
Please.
Okay. All right. Public comment. Seeing none, is there any other business? I am going to talk about meeting schedule, but anything other than meeting schedule?
And Jason, we still haven't had anything for fall town meeting, right? I know we already sent that a long time ago, but just want to make sure nothing's popped up.
So I have not received anything. Mark, is there going to be anything on Northborough Road?
So that's still a placeholder right now, but I've not seen anything and had any additional conversations. That's something I'm hoping is going to change in the next 4 days or so.
Okay. Okay. So no, Andrew, subject to that.
Yeah. Jason, I was in the selectmen's meeting this week talking about Oak Hill and talked to Karen about, you know, maybe some speed signs, which she just was hoping to fit into her budget. But is that something that we should come to town meeting as a special purchase?
How much does
Probably
the
be
speed
like-
sign cost?
I think they're like 20 with everything, with the details and the, you know, all the electrical hookups and everything.
I would think if Karen's going to bring something like that forward, that's $20,000. It clearly fits capital policy, so it
Yep.
should be vetted.
All right, I'll talk to her and see if she wants to bring it up now or just wait till spring. But you need her stuff anyway, right?
I got nothing.
All right, I'll give her a call.
Okay, so I'm going to reach out to those other departments and boards to see if they want to meet. I'm going to give them the option of joining one of our meetings, or we join their next meeting. Obviously, if we join their next meeting, I realize we're not going to get a full contingent, which I'm not sure we need. We just need representation from our committee to present kind of what we're looking for them to discuss or understand. But outside of that, we obviously have to start the FY23 process that we talked about. So I was thinking that we would go to a meeting on the 27th, so 2 weeks from tonight. I think that clears us of any of the holidays. Now, if we went another 2 weeks out, that would be the 11th, which is a public holiday, so we cannot meet. So what I was thinking is we skip a week and go to the 18th. So that would give us 2 meetings, and before kind of the current scheduled special town meeting on November 1st. But I fully anticipate that there may be another meeting that slips in there depending upon where we're at. So those 2 meetings would be mainly for getting ready for FY23 and beyond capital. But obviously we're probably gonna have to meet with Ken again and Courtney, depending upon where the schools fall out. I will let everyone know when Greg's gonna make his presentation. I imagine a lot of you are probably gonna wanna see that because it's gonna inform a good part of what we're gonna do here. Do those 2 dates work?
Sorry, what were the 2 dates again, Jason? Just so
27 and 18. So September 27 and October 18.
yeah, works for me.
Okay. Obviously, anyone let me know if they have something come up in the meantime. We'll continue to do it virtually. The other thing is I have asked the advisory chair, Kathy, for a discussion on our bylaw. Because as everyone knows, the bylaw that was indefinitely postponed at last town meeting intertwines with the advisory proposed bylaw changes. So trying to figure out a path forward there and what the final path forward is from a capital perspective, so that we can vet that with the Board of Selectmen, because they would be the sponsoring committee at that point for the article. And I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page of whether we go with the same language, make adjustments. I think we all know the history there, other than maybe absent Karen. We'll give you some prior reading materials for that meeting, but Kathy's going to get back to me on slotting it in. So Andrew, that'll probably come up when you guys meet this week.
That's good.
All right. Anything else for this evening? All right. I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right. Roll call. Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
Wheeler. And Mel.